Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited to talk about Factor 7 with author J.D. May. If you have questions, please post them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the program. So I'm going to start by introducing our author. She is a third-generation Texan and Factor 7 is her debut novel. She lives with her husband in Bayview, Texas, near the Mexican border, and along with books, enjoys travel, painting, and animal activism. She draws upon her passions as well as the beautiful places she has visited and interesting people she has met for her writing. So welcome. Thanks for joining us. Would you like to start by telling us a little bit about the book and maybe reading a short passage?
Well, I sure will. I didn't plan on reading, but I'll do my best. Factor 7 was written originally in the 90s, and actually before my daughter was even born. And I put it away and didn't touch it again until she found it, the original manuscript she found when she was in college. And she said, "Mom, you got to rewrite this." And I looked at it and said, "Nah, I'm into other things. I'm painting, but writing was always a passion. It was always a passion." So I sat down and started to write it. Well, I finished this Factor 7 and this Factor 7, and it doesn't really even resemble what I wrote in the 90s, but it still has the same name. And so, it was written long before COVID, and I have been accused of writing because of the COVID pandemic, and that is absolutely wrong because it was written long before that. And even this Factor 7 was written long before the pandemic. So it has some very, some things that are very pertinent to today, but it's purely fiction, and it was written before anything of this ever happened. So there you go.
All right.
What would you like me to read from it? I didn't choose anything, but I can read the prologue. However, the prologue really just, it doesn't set up the book, it sets up the mood of what it is and the secret society that will follow through on the sequel that I'm writing right now. I'm about 3/4 the way through with that one, and it will carry through, and that's the Keepers. They are a fictitious secret society that go back as far as perhaps the Knights Templar, I say. So in other words, they're quite ancient, and it's passed from generation to generation. And what they are they will watch over us. And as you will read in Factor 7, they don't show up. They're in the first prologue, and then they don't show up again until the last chapter. So people might be a bit confused about this, but in my trilogy of which I'm writing, the second sequel and then the third, you will see more and more and more of the Keepers. So here we go. The screams came from everywhere. The sounds were deafening. I could hear rapid gunfire, loud shouts from angry men in the streets below. Mother grabbed me and pushed me into a space beneath the kitchen sink. A blue and yellow curtain sealed the opening, and I was a prisoner in the dark, wet cabinet. I could only see outlines of figures as the horror continued. Frightened and confused, I curled into a ball under the sink and pulled a big dish towel over my head. My tiny hands covered my ears, but the loud noises and the screams of terror could not be silenced. The vibration of heavy boots rattled my senses. Doors were slamming and glass was breaking around me, but I stayed quiet as instructed despite the trembling of my small body. I heard my mother scream, and then a brief cry followed by a hideous gurgling sound. It burned an imprint into my ears that I shall never forget. Suddenly, the sound of gunshots tore through the room. The remaining tore through the room. I'm sorry. I heard Zena, my sister, begging for her life, but there were no answers for the men who shouted questions. They kept chanting, Jew girl, Jew girl. They would cut her throat if she did not tell them what they wanted to hear. But Zena was innocent of any crime, just a young girl caught up in a battle and part of a Jewish family who resisted the new order. Hitler's final solution was happening around me. I heard her beg for mercy, and then another gurgling sound and a large thump. There were stomping sounds from their boots and a rumbling, rolling timber engulfed the apartment. The men laughed and shouted something about Jews as they played out their kickball game with my sister's head. I must have been there for hours as I waited. Then all quieted. I crawled into my secret place. My mother lay dead on the kitchen floor. Her neck was cut and her head lay in an unnatural position, almost detached from her body. My sister's body lay next to her, but her head was on the other side of the room. The floor was flooded with human blood. The stench was unbearable, and I needed to vomit. I couldn't scream from terror, and I couldn't feel my legs because of the bitter cold. I somehow got to the corner of the kitchen where there was no blood and crawled into a ball. It was dark now, and I was alone with my mother and sister in a blood-bathed room. My father was nowhere around. All I heard were distant voices and dogs barking. Rain came through the broken window and washed over me. It was cold, yet I was numb. My father was fighting the enemy. He had been unable to save his wife and daughter as he fought for others. He was a member of a group that now devoted their lives to preserving our freedom. Hell had broken loose in our homeland. The Nazis were in control, and their vicious seeds of hate were generating death and torture to everyone that they deemed inferior or who questioned them. My father was smart and cunning. He somehow got to me. As he carried me down the 2 flights of stairs, I hid my eyes from the stacks of bodies that had yet to be removed. But before he laid me in the back floorboard of an old car, I saw the wooden panel trucks with bodies piled on top of one another. I saw women, children, men, and children all together were going to what I know now to be a mass grave in Białystok. We drove for some time and he said nothing but that he loved me. Then I felt the car slow and I heard the brakes squeak. The engine rattled and then finally became silent. He said we had arrived where we would find help for me. We entered an old building. A rabbi was there with other men. Each man touched me and swore to my care. My father cried as he hugged me. I didn't understand what was happening. He then led me to an opening in the concrete floor. It was dark and cold. Stale air wafted from it. He held me in his arms and whispered that I would be cared for by this group of men. I remember him saying to me, "Remember this, my son, freedom and liberty are goals of righteous men. Learn from this group and become a keeper of peace." Suddenly, the echo of automatic machine gun bullets penetrated the empty room where we all stood. They were coming, he said to the others. I begged him not to leave me. Then a bullet hit him. My father's blood splattered my face. Another man fell on top of me and pushed me into the hole. I moaned as my body hit the damp floor. Then there was darkness as the man closed the hole with something heavy. Sounds were muffled, but I knew the familiar shouts of men who wore the brown shirts. I hated that sound. I hated them. That night would go down in history as the night of the broken glass. I was in hell, and I swore if I ever got free of the terror, I would be strong like my father. The remaining men did keep me safe, and they nurtured me. As I grew, they educated me. The time came for the men to tell me the secrets of their mission. I took a lifetime oath. I would never break the codes that had saved my life that awful night. I taught the codes to my sons, and they will to theirs, and on through perpetuity. We are patriots of every nationality. We are not protecting any one country, religion, or political ideology, but the basic freedoms of mankind. We are the keepers.
All right, I think that's a great taste of what's coming.
Thanks.
So thank you very much. So I'll start with my first question. So obviously you said in your beginning that this book was written a while ago.
Long time ago.
And with everything going on in the world right now, it's clearly a timely, while fictionalized topic. What drew you to the bioweaponry aspects of the book?
I think it's multiple things. One, I love science. Two, I have no science background. But three, when I first wrote the first one, in 1991, 92, SARS and MERS were emerging into the world, which were the first coronaviruses and are of the corona
family.
Yeah, virus. And I think that I saw then that I guess I knew that bioweaponry was going to be an issue in my lifetime. And when I rewrote it, I continued to know, even though we had not had anything out of Wuhan or anything else, I continued to know that there were really three threats to us, and that was bioweaponry, cyber attacks, and nuclear. And those three things I had chose to write of the bioweaponry. And I did a lot of research, a lot. The virus that is in the book is completely fiction, and I don't want to frighten anybody by it because it is fiction. But the reality is that we are moving into a new platform of war. And God help us, because we are in a position of a lot of things that we as men and women, earthlings, will not be able to maintain. So, you know, that's where it's all about. And I have the keepers as the hope that maybe they can do something, and maybe they can.
And so, since you don't have a science background, talk about that research process. What do you do to find the information, and then how do you turn that into something that's in a fictional book that people can actually understand and is not science speak?
I have been accused that there's a little bit too much science in this book by some people. And then I have had some people say, wow, this is incredible. So it's a mixed bag. But I spent probably an entire year studying the RNA and the DNA of viruses, studying how virulent a virus can become and how it can mutate, how it would mutate from animals to humans and certain DNA. And that's what this is about. Hint, hint, that this virus will only attack a certain DNA. That is possible. That is an entire possibility. And that alone, to me, was frightening enough to continue doing the research to write this book. And when you consider what a virus is and how a virus can mutate into so many things that you can't keep up with, it's a Pandora's box that can never be closed once it's opened. And that's the frightening part of it. But yes, I spent probably years studying it. And I hope that it is conveyed in the book in a realistic manner. Again, let me emphasize, it is fiction. It is not meant to frighten someone, but it is a possibility. I mean, if I were to speak of today's times of whether I believe it's a bioweapon or it was created, and I figure that's going to be a question someone's going to ask, so I'm going to head that off ahead of time. Did it come out of China as a weapon, or did it come out of China as a mistake, or was it an accident? And I'm going to tell you that anything I would tell you would be pure speculation. It has nothing to do with the book. I have no information on that whatsoever. And so please understand that it was not written with that in mind, because it was written far before that.
Right. It just happened to get released in the middle of a pandemic.
Yes.
It's very similar to what's happening.
Yes. Right.
And I think it's really interesting because, I think we've briefly over the years, right, talked about chemical warfare and those
Right.
sorts of things. And, if you're kind of thinking about research, right, it is kind of the next step, right, to figure out how to turn something that makes people sick, that's not a chemical, that's unseen, that you can't really control where it goes. It's kind of the next step in where that sort of, if you're looking for biological ways to wage.
You have no defense.
Right.
Something like this is that you have no defense whatsoever. And of course, in the book, and I'm sure you have read it, in the book, it's a group of men and perhaps women that have an issue with a group of people, and they are going after a specific DNA terrorism. And I was hoping, even though I wrote the book and it was to eliminate terrorism, I was hoping that that would be the case in the world. And I think that we are seeing that that's not going to be the case. So perhaps as of the last few weeks, you might even consider that the book is even more relevant than it was even before.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a definitely kind of like the whole time reading it, it's like this is kind of in some ways it's the perfect time, and it's also kind of the scary time, right? Because then it really makes you think about, even though it's fictional, the things that could happen, right? And
Right.
And how
Right.
are we going to react to that? Because
it's just for my crazy mind, though.
Yes,
it just came out of my crazy mind.
Right. And what would people do if there was a virus out there that only affected one group of the population? Would we do everything we could to make it stop, or would we just be like, yeah, well, it's not me, right?
I would hope that we would do everything we could. I would hope, and I would
Right.
pray for that.
Yes.
But the fact of the matter is, it is entirely possible to create something like that. And it is entirely possible that it could be that, as you say, it could be something that people say, depending on what's going on in the world at the time, it could be something that people would say, hey, you know what? They deserve it. But nobody deserves
Right.
across the board. We've got bad and we've got good, and the good
Right.
cannot suffer from what the bad does. But the book just it was just written as something to keep your interest, something to spur your interest, and maybe a little prophetic in a bit. I've been told that. That's not my words, but God help us if that was to be the case.
Well, and I think too, the unintended consequences, right? Like, viruses mutate, right? So you
Right.
make a virus and you think, oh, it's going to go after this DNA strand, but then it can
It
change
moves.
and adapt, kind of like if you think about the Jurassic Park movies where, they use frog DNA and frogs can change sex based on if there's no, if it's all male, then they can, right? And the unintended consequences of that.
Right.
And there's actually a YA novel from like the 90s by Scott Westerfeld where in response to climate change, people changed the DNA of plants and flowers, thinking that
Oh, wow.
would cause them to grow more, and then that would kind of reverse some of the effects of climate change. But then what happened
GMOs.
yes, and then what happened is they become an invasive species and they take over everything, and they kill off like they kill off all the trees and the plants and all the unintended consequences of the things we don't think about when we're manipulating things like that. So
right. Anytime you manipulate, I'm sorry.
I was just I really enjoyed that part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a good book. I need to pick that one up. But yeah, the manipulation of a virus or a bacteria and the delivery system was something that I spent a lot of time on. And it could happen. It's very feasible. It's fiction. Please, I keep wanting to say that because I don't want to make anybody think that there is anything out there that I'm getting I'm not getting secrets from anybody from up here or down here or around here from this. It's strictly fiction, but we know from our history that things, let's face it, they used smallpox during the war, not the United States, but they used smallpox as a bioweapon as far back as whatever it was, 1800s. So this would not be the first time that it would be used. And to target a specific DNA, and in my book, I cover the virus possibility as a bioweapon, and I cover terrorism, and I cover, and we haven't gotten to this yet, the Central American and the Mexican cartels. And there is a reason why I put terrorism and the cartels together. And it's because they are actually, in some degree, working together even as we speak. And so you get a kind of a real stew of evil in Factor 7, and kind of how they work together. And we know, everyone I think knows, that China is funding the cartels, and China is laundering money for the cartels. And that is part of the sequel of where it goes from here. and what is happening with world economies. And Germline, the sequel, digs a little deeper into the cartel and the connection to world trade and to viruses and to illegal drugs such as fentanyl.
Well, and you know, it's interesting that if the drug trade wasn't funding some part of the economy, we would have figured out a way, right, to kind of lessen some of this, right? But because
don't you know it?
Yes, absolutely.
Don't you know
yes.
it?
Yep. Yep.
Oh, I think we know, going back to the 70s, that you know, cocaine was traded for things. We traded guns for cocaine and cocaine for guns. And I love this country, and I love freedom, but we haven't always been completely open with the American people. Our government has not always been open with the American people of what's going on. And that's a shame, because I think the American people can understand. We're not dumb people. We can understand what's going on, tell us the truth. But factors that, again, that, that's hitting on to politics. And my book is not political.
Right.
And I'm not trying to get into politics into this conversation. It's just that there is a lot going on, and it's been going on for a long time. And there's a lot of stories out there that you can write if you're a fiction writer, having to do with add a bit of truth, and you can make a pretty good novel out of it.
And it's the weaving of the stories. It's the weaving of the stories together.
The weaving of the stories.
Yeah. So that kind of leads into my next question. There's a large cast of characters here. So talk about the process of character development and how you decide who should push the story along in different parts of the book.
All right, folks. I'm pretty sane, and y'all have to understand that I'm as sane as everybody else. My characters talk to me. They literally talk to me. And I miss my characters when I'm not writing about them. So that's how much I get involved with my characters. Sam Hawkins, he started out as not a mousy man, but he didn't have a life to speak of. He was a trauma surgeon. He didn't do much. He tried to do stuff, but he'd lost his sense of humor. He'd lost his, he was just kind of there, not really a very important or special personality. And I attempted, and I hope I succeeded, as he found a reason. And when he met Rainey Arienzo, I hope that it shows the growth that Sam had for finding a true purpose that he felt like he needed to follow. Win, lose, or show, or win, place, and show, he felt like that he and Rainey had to go that direction. And I think that was pushing the narrative of Sam and Rainey. John Albright was everything wicked that I've ever known in life put down on paper. Every narcissist that I ever knew, and everybody who was a big mouth that I ever knew, that was John Albright. And John didn't talk to me as much as Rainey and Sam did, but Rainey and Sam would wake me up in the middle of the night, and I'd get up and write for an hour or two, because they would tell me where they wanted to go next. So, I tried to develop the characters in that manner, allowing my imagination, of course, it's not them talking to me, but my imagination of growing them as humans, they really did talk to me. They really did.
You're not the first
They
author
really
to
did.
say that, so it's not unusual. And
Yeah.
you do have quite a few people who are, John Albright is one of them, who are truly terrible people, and some
Mhm.
who think that they're not terrible, but are still pretty terrible.
Terrible.
So how do you decide too much is too much?
I think that there was too much all the way through the book. And the reason why there was I mean, let's face it, it's an R-rated adult read all the way through. Because there was such evil, I couldn't whitewash anything anybody did. It had to be consistent throughout the novel. Now, one of the ones I think you may be speaking of is El Espino, who was the cartel, right? And he was a pathetic soul, and I tried to write him that way. He made his choices, which is one of the underlying themes of the book, is the fact that everybody has an opportunity to make choices, and choices really do determine where you're going to go. And El Espino's choices, perhaps when he was 11, 12 years old on a street that I write about, and his mother is killed and his sister is taken into prostitution, and all the things that truly do happen to the impoverished in Mexico, even as we speak, he found a way. He was smart, but he used his intelligence to become evil and to become the head of the largest cartel in Mexico. In a way, when you hear him speak, you almost feel sympathy for him, yet you really should not, and you cannot, because he's a cold-blooded murderer. But I wanted you to feel that this man has a soul. Somewhere deep inside of him was a soul. And at the end, with what happens that Sam and Rainey are forced to do as they are his prisoners, he shows the good side of himself, but it's too late. And I think that's another thing. You can repent from what you're doing, but if it's I'm going to repent from what I'm doing, but I'm going to keep all that stuff that I got, like all of his money and all of his homes and everything. He didn't want to get rid of that, but he wanted to be good. If you're going to repent, you're going to have to repent entirely. And that's what happened to El Espino as he grew. He tried, he was unsuccessful. He was unredeemable, but he wanted to be redeemed.
I think that's a perfect way to describe him. So, as someone who grew up in the area that you're writing about, can you talk about how you chose to integrate the region you know and the things that you love into the book?
Well, I think you ought to write about what you know to some degree. And I grew up, of course. I have seen all of my adult life, the Mexican cartel and what they do. I've seen it all. I think I make a statement in the book about that they poured gasoline down the throats of their of the other cartel to kill them. That was an actual story that really did happen. I speak Spanish. You have to if you live down here. I went to school in San Miguel de Allende, which I write about in the book. So I think you have to know when you're writing something enough of truth to make it logical. Again, the research I made, the science I did was purely taking the liberties of fiction with a little bit of knowledge and making a story. The other part was real. I mean, it's where I live. It's what I know. It's what I've experienced. And I chose Texas because I like the Texas colloquialisms. And I love Texas. Let's face it. I love Texas. And I think that I could put a bit of what we love about Texas into the book. And there's, I try to put some humor in the book. Sam is a good old boy. He's a doctor and all, but he's still an East Texas good old boy. And he comes up with some of the funny East Texas colloquialisms that only Texas colloquialisms can really say in 3 words. I mean, I think my favorite is, you can't set buzzard eggs and hatch canaries. And you can't. I mean, if you don't do something good, you're not going to get good out of it. Bad's not going to turn into good. So I think, I mean, that was very important to me. And, the next one's the sequel's basically in Mexico, is basically done in Mexico. But, I travel the world. I had a very dear friend who lived in Italy, and that's why Rainey is from Italy. And because I knew Italy from my friend Sandy, who is now deceased, and Sandy's last name was Arienzo. She had married an Italian cardiologist. So there's some things there, the cardiology, and it all kind of ran together. And that I think this is my first published novel, so I don't know where the others come up with it that do it, but I suspect that other novelists kind of draw upon things that they know and then expand upon them and make them into these crazy fiction books.
Well, and I felt like you could definitely feel that you were at the border, that you were in Houston, that you were kind of, in and around that area. And I liked the discussion of Houston traffic, and right, it's very realistic to what life is like in that area. Yeah. So I really enjoyed that you kind of pulled that in and use that rich tapestry of what to kind of populate the world that you were creating as well. So yes. And all the discussion about Mexican food made me want to go have Mexican food. So
I know. I know. I eat it almost every week. Oink oink,
Right. So talk about your writing process. Are you an obsessive outliner? Do you fly by the seat of your pants?
No.
Or do you do something kind of in between?
Kind of in between, but I write every day. I'm going to go back and tell you that when I get into the zone of writing, I may write 6-8 hours and barely get up, maybe run to the bathroom real quick and get a glass of water, but that's about it. My characters do talk to me. I write every day, and every chapter, when I leave it off, I have to get up early in the morning to write the next one. I do not do any outlines whatsoever. I sometimes know the ending. In fact, I did not know the ending in Factor 7, but I do know the ending in the sequel Germline. I do know how that ends. But I write contrary to every creative writing teacher you've ever heard, which may be wrong, the wrong way to do it. And I'm not going to tell anybody how to write, but I sit down and I just start writing. And then I cut and I cut and I add and I cut. and then the final comes out. Yeah, but no outlines, and I don't necessarily even know where the third chapter is going to come from from the beginning. It kind of rolls itself for me. But I don't quit writing. I write continuously.
I think that's actually good advice. So if anybody has any questions, don't forget you can put them in the chat. So when I'm trying to think how I want to word this. So when you took that original novel that you had and it now looks nothing like it did before, was that okay, I'm gonna just scrap it and start over, or was it I'm gonna start with this chapter and maybe I'm gonna change some things, and then by the end it didn't look anything like it had before?
I think it's the first thing you said. I saw it, I said, I'm just going to rewrite it. And then as I started rewriting, I thought, this is not logical for today. And Sam Hawkins was in it. And Sam Hawkins did a lot of crazy things in the first manuscript, which I don't have Sam doing in this one. I had Sam as being kind of a crazy man in the first one. And he calmed down a lot for the second one. I pretty well scrapped a lot of it. And now here's the weird part, that I named the first manuscript Factor 7. I have no earthly idea why. I just decided I would name the virus that is in the original manuscript Factor 7. I wrote this Factor 7, and in my research, I realized what Factor 7 was, and I implemented it into my virus. And I was just not educated enough to know what it was. I just liked the name in the 90s. But Factor 7 is a protein that hemophiliacs have, which causes their excessive bleeding. It is a clotting protein that you must have to survive or bleed to death. And that's how I built the virus, that when you are affected by the virus, many things happen to you, but the ultimate death is complete hemorrhage. And I, even as the writer, found it very odd that I chose the name in the 90s and I really didn't even know what it was. So go figure. I think writing is almost ethereal. Maybe I'm a little bit kooky, but it's almost ethereal. And I people, you get into the zone and it's like you kind of go somewhere else when you're writing. I think painters do the same thing. Probably poets do the same thing. Anybody, I think the arts, you kind of go out of your body, out of your norm, and start writing or start painting or whatever. And I don't mean that to be some kind of a weird perception. I just think that there's something that an artist does that perhaps you have to begin to understand that it's a little bit different from perhaps a mathematician. But I think a mathematician might get involved in their sequence of numbers and letters and equations, and they become involved in that. So it's kind of going out of that, thinking out of one side of your brain and then putting the two sides of your brain together, or working on one side more than you work on the other. I don't know. But I think that's where art comes from, and any passion must come from that. And writing and painting are passions to me. So therefore, it's kind of an out-of-body experience, if that makes sense.
It does,
Yes,
totally.
she's
Yes,
a little weird.
yes, yes.
Yes, she's a little weird.
So you've talked about the sequel. Do you have an idea of when the sequel might be out?
I would like to think that it will be finished by the first of the year. And probably, if I was to be realistic with the length of time for launch, it will be, I'll probably have the advanced reader copies done by mid spring, early summer. But I suspect that we'll probably, publisher would probably want 6 months in pre-sale. So to the public, probably not until end of the year. I'm going to guess end of the year. But there's still a lot of these. There's still a lot of these out there, and I hope everybody gets their hands on one at the library or Amazon or Barnes and Noble or any place. But the library, go to the library first.
Yes, we have copies, and we also have at the end. There's a local bookstore that has copies that I'll put up their information at the end if you want to go and buy a copy for yourself.
And let me
go ahead.
May I say one thing?
Mm-hmm.
If anybody picks up a copy and they want a signed copy, they can go to my website, and I think there's an email address, and if they will email me, I will give them an address to mail the book. I will mail it back to them with a stamped, if they will do a self-stamp, postage, I'll get it back to them. Or free of charge, I'll do a book plate and mail them a book plate signed by the author if they want that.
That is awesome. I have put Diane's website in the chat here for everybody. So that is great. All right. So if you had one piece of advice to give to aspiring authors, what would it be?
Do it. Do it. Doesn't matter if you like what you're writing on the first page, second page, 10 pages, 300 pages, write it. And know that, like me, I can't tell you how much I scratched out and how much I rewrote. And don't worry about that, but put something down on paper or on the computer as it is every day. You don't have to write much, but write every day, because you get really stale if you don't. And it gets real easy to say, I'm not going to write today. But if you make a habit of sitting down every single day, I believe that your creativity grows as you put your thoughts down. And you may feel like, oh, this is bad, but the next thought might be really, really good. So just go for it. Just do it.
I love that. All right, last question. Is there anything about the book you'd like to have talked about that I didn't mention?
Well, I think everybody needs to know that it is an adult read. Definitely adult read. It is unvarnished in adult situations, consensual adult situations, and violence and language. So keep it out of the hands of your children. But again, that was not done for shock factor. It was done because of the whole overall book and what the book is a bunch of bad people doing a bunch of bad things with some good people thrown in to try to get rid of them. And you can't whitewash bad. And if I'd whitewashed any part of it and made it butterflies and unicorns in the adult situation or any of the others, I think the book would not have been realistic. And I think fiction should be enough realism in it that it makes you go, wow, what if? And that's what I was trying to achieve.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to end it. So thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you've enjoyed our discussion, and we did record this presentation. We will post it to our YouTube page in a week or so. So be sure to subscribe to our channel for more great content from the Fort Worth Public Library and turn on those notifications. And if you'd like to purchase a copy,
Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so very, very much.
There are copies available at the dock here in Fort Worth, and their contact information is on the screen. So thank you for your time, Diane. It was great. And I enjoyed the book, and I hope everybody else goes and gets a copy. Thank you so much and have a great evening.